It's a very efficient election system that we have here, the best in the nation, I'm told.
I'm told there's no fraud, at all. And yeah, well, let me tell you, there is fraud. I want to go back to the, we can come back again to the newest report that you're going to roll out in the next few days, which I'm sure we'll see in the papers, and I'm sure we'll see them ripping you apart because they love to talk about sour grapes or how you made a mistake or whatever. But back on the first one, when you first stumbled on it, for lack of a better word, were with voter registration cards. And they would have their voter registration card. They would say they lived at 1234 15th Street. And I personally drove to 1234 15th Street, and there I am at a swamp. Imagine that. Do you want to talk about that a little?
Well, sure. That's one of the earliest research projects that we started doing. When a new voter registers, as you know, they are mailed a postal verification card. That's just a little postcard that tells them, you are now registered and here's where you vote. If that comes back undeliverable, then they're flagged for challenge at the next election. We wanted to look into why these PVC cards were coming back, so we also ran a mail certification system against the entire voter registration list. In any place that we found there was an invalid address, we would ask volunteers to just drive around there and see what's there and take a picture if they found anything out of the ordinary. And I know that you found this swamp, which I'm still wondering if the voter's name might have been Yoda. We'll have to go back and check that registration card. Maybe it's a legitimate address for the Jedi Master. But I drove around myself and took pictures of warehouses, and Jeff Davis, the president of Minnesota's majority, found a park with a construction site on it that was a registered voter address. So yeah, there's definitely a serious problem there. And we found thousands of these. We couldn't drive around and look at all of them, but there were thousands of invalid addresses in the voter registration file. And
you also found people who were 108 years old?
Yeah, several. And we did discover that some of them were explainable by a weird conversion that happened in the statewide voter registration system around 1980. They switched over to computerized records from the old paper records. And prior to that, they never asked somebody for their year of birth. I guess it was considered rude. So they never verified even that you were old enough to vote before they'd let you register back then. So as a consequence, when they're doing the data entry, they put in a default birth year of 1900 for a lot of people. So we had to eliminate all the people with a birth year of 1900, and we still had thousands of people that were well over 108 years of age, and somewhere like 120, 130 years old and still on the active voter registration rolls. How this can happen is really beyond me. This should be regularly purged. But apparently, these are people that are still voting.
And you also mentioned about people who had died were still voting.
Well, we found that thousands of deceased voters were on the active voter registration rolls, and SVRS indicated that some of them actually cast ballots in the 2008 election. Now, we've been able to get explanations for some of them where there was an instance where someone had died and their spouse came in and saw that they hadn't been removed from the voter registration roll, so they wrote deceased on the line, and an election worker thought that was a signature and scanned it in and gave them a voter history. So that's how some of it can be explained. But the bottom line on this, those kind of errors should never happen, because when you die, you're supposed to be removed from the voter registration rolls to prevent someone else from walking in and using that name, which is pretty easy. I have a list of every dead voter that's registered in Minnesota. If I had nefarious intent, I could use that list to cast fraudulent votes all over the state. It'd be simple, because all you give is a name, no photo ID required. I'm John Johnson. They say, okay, sign here, Mr. Johnson. Free ballot.
Oh man, it's crazy. Okay, so we made some changes over at the legislature this year to try to, for example, so that all the counties were using consistent standards to accept absentee ballots.
That's a big one.
That was a huge one, because you would have the exact same ballot and we saw this in the Frank and Coleman recount, the exact same absentee ballot, and it would be rejected in one county and accepted in another county. And that was one of the example of the changes in election law that we saw this past year. We never did get photo ID.
No, that was something that our DFL-dominated legislature just would not let through. I was actually surprised that the vote went the way it did in the committee in the House, because one Democrat at least crossed over. Do you remember who it was?
I don't remember who it was, but I know one did cross over.
Yeah, so it was actually closer than I expected it to be, but we still couldn't get over that hump. Next year, I'm hoping for a little bit different composition in the legislature, and we can actually get this passed.
Different composition?
80% of Minnesotans support it. It's
Right.
not just Republicans, it's across the spectrum. It's just a common sense measure.
And that's been a state fair question for the House for sure, and I'm guessing probably the Senate too, for several years now. Do you think photo ID should be the state law? And we hear over and over again that photo ID will reduce the number of people voting. Do you think it's true?
No, in Ohio, when they instituted their very strict voter ID law, they saw participation turn up. The turnout went up.
They lie.
Of course, I mean, all the arguments against photo ID are specious. That's one of them. That's a ridiculous argument. The idea that people would be disenfranchised because they don't have an ID. Well, I mean, when you vote, you have to register to vote. That's filling out a form. Getting an ID is filling out a form. If you show up to the polls prepared, you're going to vote. You have to prepare by registering, or you have to prepare by getting a photo ID. It's really not much different. There's a cost, but the law that's been proposed to institute photo ID for voting will provide a free ID to people that can't afford it. And it's $20 every 5 years or something like that.
Do you remember when we were hearing testimony on the photo ID bill, Lucky Rosenblum got up and he had the photo ID in one hand and the utility bill that said occupant in the other hand?
Well, it said Lucky, and Lucky's not actually his name.
Correct. Correct.
Lucky's his nickname. He could vote with his nickname with that utility bill, but the photo ID had his actual name, which actually escapes me right now.
Yeah, I know. I'm calling him Lucky. I'm sticking with it. But it was funny. He said because he had moved, he couldn't vote. I mean, that's absolutely amazing. So photo ID would have, in many cases, helped people vote, and that's probably why Indiana, right, saw the increase in voter turnout.
Ohio?
Ohio, Indiana.
Well, both of them, I think, require photo ID. But
Yeah. But which is fabulous. Have you ever read the report from Milwaukee where they looked at the voter fraud in Wisconsin?
Yeah, that was 2004 election that they were researching there, and they found a lot of the same sort of things that we did. It was the parallels were actually striking.
I know. And I thought, oh, this is so funny. We've got this great study from Wisconsin, but apparently the fraud ends at the river and and doesn't stretch over into Minnesota.
Well, over in Wisconsin, they're trying to do some research right now on whether people that live on the border towns are crossing over and voting in both states. So it's Wisconsin that's initiated that investigation. Minnesota's cooperating, but we don't have any similar investigation going on here.
What does that mean, cooperating, and how can we talk to the people in Wisconsin?
Well, they're providing our voter registration rolls to them for their examination so they can compare it to their own.
I think we should have a meeting with them.
Oh, well, the interesting thing about the Wisconsin investigation that happened in the 2004 election is the Department of Justice got involved, and the FBI. And they worked hand in hand with the local election and law enforcement officials to track this stuff down. We have asked for the same sort of investigation here in Minnesota, but the Department of Justice has kind of changed since then, and they have completely ignored our requests for assistance.
Oh, that's really, really unfortunate. You know, the other question that comes out a lot is, well, if a convicted felon is out of jail, why shouldn't they vote?
Because they're still being punished for their crime. Probation is part of their sentence. When you're being punished for rape or murder or fraud or theft or burglary, you shouldn't be having a hand in writing the laws that you're being punished under.
Exactly. I think that part drives me absolutely crazy.
It just makes sense. Minnesota is very liberal about this. In a lot of states, you're convicted of a felony, your voting rights are taken away for life unless a judge specifically hands them back to you. Here, as soon as you're done with your probation, you are immediately re-enfranchised and able to vote again. I think, you know, maybe we should look at it on a case-by-case basis and leave it to the judges to decide if they should be participating in our society when they've already demonstrated such antisocial behavior in the past.
And one of the other things that I hear about convicted felons frequently is, well, they didn't know they couldn't vote. in spite of the fact they're told when they get out, they're told in writing with their, now that you're out. And if you do register same-day registration in Minnesota, which is another thing we have to get rid of, it flat out says convicted felons, you cannot vote until you're done with. So to say that they just didn't know that they couldn't vote is another distortion of reality.
Well, that's pretty tough, but that's really what the county attorneys are going on. If they interview a suspected ineligible felon voter and they tell them, I didn't know that I couldn't vote, they say, oh, well, good enough because I have to prove intent. But, I mean, the parole agreement that they sign says, I'm not going to vote. The voter registration says, by signing this, I certify that I am not an ineligible felon voter. Right at the top of every roster page at the polling place, it says, by signing this, I certify that I am eligible to vote. So that's 3 signatures. I mean, in contract law, you're not going to get away with saying, well, I'm not held to that contract because I didn't read it. You sign the contract, you're agreeing to what it says. And these people have had 3 opportunities to sign a document saying, I am eligible to vote before they get to that point.
Amazing. So what's up next for Minnesota Majority?
Well, we're going to be launching an election integrity program around the 2010 election that is going to involve an advertising campaign. It's going to be additional research on the voter rolls to make sure they're in good shape before we go into the 2010 election. A call center, going to set up a hotline, and people will be able to call and report any anomalies that they discover on election day. We'll be able to refer that to the right authorities and also log it all so that we can reveal how good our system's working.
Fabulous. And how would we go about getting a hold of Minnesota Majority? How would we go about helping, and what can we do to help?
MinnesotaMajority.org, and you can contact us through that website. And if you're signed up for our action alerts, we'll let you know what kind of help we need, and you can get involved.
And I'm signed up for the action alerts. They're fabulous. They do not indaunt you with one after another. They are very informative. You do a great job keeping people up to date with everything that's going on. And I just want to say about Minnesota Majority, we're down to our last minute now.
Okay.
But not only did you do a fabulous job on the election integrity stuff, you've also been involved in all kinds of different things with traditional values, with and it can be any number of things. The healthcare legislation, global warming. You've got phenomenal stuff on global warming, all at MinnesotaMajority.org.
And our sister site, globalclimatescam.com.
Okay, last minute. This is our last wrap-up minute. What's the most important thing you want people to know about Minnesota Majority?
We are there as a resource to help you become an effective activist.
An activist is exactly what we need now. Exactly
a
what we need.
kitchen table activist, actually. We make it easy.
Yes. They don't preach at us, folks. They come out, they provide us with information, and then we're able to make intelligent decisions about a wide variety of issues. Dan McGrath, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Sue.
It was great.
Good time.
Best of luck to Minnesota Majority always. I'll be glad to help.
Thanks a lot. I know I can count on you.